Okay, I got one more person who's going to be controversial, so I don't know if we should break there.
No, let's do it. Let's
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Do you know who this is? Who I'm going to say?
I do not.
Oh, okay. So this is very hot. This is the hottest hot take I've ever had.
So
And
I feel like I'm obligated to say, how hot is it? Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Um, no, this is a guy named Wes Huff,
Okay.
who just was on Joe Rogan Experience a week or so ago.
Okay.
And I had to look him up. Like a lot of people, they're like, never heard of this guy before, which is not a slam. But in the scholarly world, we all like to know people. And I personally, because maybe I'm a Gen Xer, child of divorce, I'm like, if I don't know them personally, I get, especially when somebody's advocating something in the religious world, I'm like, I want to know like what kind of a father they are, what kind of a friend they are, whatever. Can't always be true. You can't always know these things, but he goes on Joe Rogan. I don't know what he's a smart guy, very intelligent, very likable. He's Canadian. So he's got that, that Canadian affability where you're just like, this guy seems like a good dude. Right. But he also is an apologetics person. I think he calls himself an apologist. He works on critical text criticism, which is comparing manuscripts, New Testament manuscripts, and, looking at how they're different from one another and how they're the same. He does, like Turnitin for New Testament manuscript, plagiarism checking, that kind of stuff. And it's clear that that's where he works. He's what I would call a factitionalist. He's got a command of a lot of facts and he kind of has them ordered very clearly. But as I went, because again, people were asking me, what do you think about this guy? And so I started watching some of his videos and he's an impressive guy, I think. And I think, as I said on Twitter, I think he's a force for good. However, I instantly ran into some kind of interpretations on the Gospels where he was just speaking about how he interpreted some passages in the Gospels. I thought, oh, that's actually kind of a problematic interpretation. Not just that it's maybe I don't agree with the theology or I do agree with it. That has nothing to do with that. He's not actually saying what the text says. And his conclusions are drawn from something where he's ignoring what the text actually says. In this case, it was, you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, this famous chastisement of the Pharisees. And he then paraphrased that as Jesus was saying, you guys are stupid for tithing spices. And he misses what Jesus also says in that line, which is, these you should do. You should tithe mint, dill, and do that. Like, good for you.
Yeah.
But not while neglecting the weightier matters. So it's an issue of balance there. To me, it seemed like the text criticism stuff, even though he says things in the text criticism stuff in that Joe Rogan interview, he says, things like the Isaiah scroll is word for word identical to Isaiah in the Masoretic text, which it is not. Like, and I think he meant it in like when you compare them, they're very high degree, 90+% identical to each other, which is just a high degree over a long period of time. But you don't say word for word identical.
Yeah.
In my world, unless you mean they are word for word identical. So I think someone like Wes Huff, who's just come on the scene very quickly, everything I've tweeted about him, I've gotten hate from his followers. Like, this guy's leading everybody to Jesus. I think it's great that we got a guy, like even my critique of him, I think is wonderful because like, when have we ever talked about text criticism in the public square of the New Testament if it weren't for someone like Wes somehow, stumbling backwards or forwards into this kind of this public interview. But that to say, even though Wes is a good dude and he's very intelligent and he knows what he's talking about in a lot of these cases, including me, I'm a decent dude. And some of the times I know what I'm talking about, but I want you to check my work too. Like, I don't want you to just listen to me. In fact, you'll often hear me say, don't take my word for it. Go look at these people, right? And see what they say. And so I think when we think of public intellectuals, 1 Corinthians 1 is a really helpful statement for Christians, but just in general, anybody. It's just common wisdom. Don't do this. Well, I'm a Wes Huff guy, and I'm a Jordan Peterson, or no, I listen to everything Dan McClellan says, because the beauty is in the discussion, and that wisdom is greater. I have this deep belief that there's more wisdom to be found in a group of mature people than any single individual in that group. Even when you have a truly wise person within that group, it's the group wisdom that is actually the thing that God wants for us, speaking as a Christian. And so I think Wes Huff is just another in a long string of good examples of people who are doing good. I would say as a pastor, he's probably even doing what God called him to do. He seems like it's a good, and he seems like he's balancing his personal responsibilities fairly well in all of this. But I think he would probably also say, nobody, don't say I'm a Huffian Christian who follows Wes Huff. Don't say I'm a Petersonian, but we need to listen to a balance of voices. And we need to listen to people who speak within their expertise as well. And when you're not speaking in your expertise, you should probably clarify and say, hey, I'm kind of out of my wheelhouse. I recently tweeted about this book by Aaron Hornkel on linguistics and classical biblical Hebrew. I thought it was brilliant. I was like, but it's not my specialty. But to me, I read it, it makes sense. It sounds like what he's doing there is making solid points. And what I'm doing is I'm inviting my colleague friends on Twitter to kind of come in and like, oh yeah, that's a great book, but he doesn't seem to be taking so-and-so's research into account or whatever.
Sure.
And that's what we do in scholarship. This is a constant conversation scholars have. I submit articles or chapters or books, and a couple of scholars who I don't even know who they are going to tear it apart and tell me what's wrong with it and tell me what's good about it. I do the same for other scholars. This is how we advance, is by critiquing and sharpening each other. I think there's somewhere in the Bible they talk about sharpening each other.
Yeah, iron something.
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
Ferric metals, sharpening, honing ferric metals. Yes.